Morning, guys. For those of you who are watching this live, what I'll do, I'll just give you 60 seconds just to jump on for those who are joining live. Otherwise, guys, if you're watching this on delay, which I know most of you have let me know that you are, jump forward to 60 seconds, and 60 seconds I'll jump into the content that we'll be covering today. So feel forward to skip ahead now. Again, we'll just give it a minute for those people to jump on who are watching us live. Today, we're talking about how to build a movement assessment into a PT session. We'll go through a bit of a case study of what we do, talk you through the systems that we use and some of the science behind this as well. We'll give it 15 seconds, guys, and then we will kick things off. If you are watching live, please feel free to jump in comments as we go, ask any questions. If I see those comments pop up during this live webinar, I will get you guys answers. If you have any discussion points, feel free to chuck them in there as well. Okay. Thanks for joining me, guys. This live webinar, or those of you watching on replay, is covering how to build a movement assessment into a PT session. So this is a great one for personal trainers out there, anyone who's working one-on-one with clients. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about some of the science in terms of how we would do this, and then look at Range of Motion, my business. You can see some of the material that I have behind me here basically explains how we do this, and we have a system that we've built that allows us to implement this. In terms of why we do this, obviously this is a pretty crowded industry, the PT space in particular, and you're looking for anything that you can have to start from someone who is just doing you turn up and you do 3 sets of 10 of a bunch of different things. Anything you can do to differentiate yourself is going to be good. So incorporating this movement screening is a great idea. A lot of the businesses that I work with range of motion business mentoring, they do have some sort of movement screening, but this movement screening is often built in every 12 weeks. You do a movement screening, these are the rehab exercises you then do. But I think we're really missing an opportunity there, an opportunity to update this every single time they come in, and then as a result of this, start to prescribe some extra work to do. So I see there being 3 steps that we need to take. We need to assess, we need to identify, and we need to correct. So the assess is to visually look at a movement and say, okay, I can see that this fault is being manifested in this squat, press, push-up, bench, deadlift, whatever it may be. That's assess. Then identify. So you then say, well, I can see this fault. What is causing that? I'm using this as a diagnostic tool. You can see that when someone is squatting and their knees fall in as they squat, you can draw certain conclusions about this person, their musculoskeletal system. You draw these conclusions, and then that moves us on to step 3, which is correct. And we say, well, let's now prescribe some exercises, remedial work, clinic-based rehab work to do as a result of that. So we assess, we see that there's a fault, we identify, we say, well, this is what the fault is being caused by the underlying problems, and then we correct it with some sort of exercise prescription. And the way that we do this is we break this down into the different movements or positions that people can go into. So there are a series of different movement shapes that we often see, and they are seen across the board. So you have things like a squat. You have someone doing a setup for a deadlift or a clean or a snatch or some sort of hip hinge. We have a lockout position, which is like your anatomical position. We have a rack position or a headstand, can be the same sort of thing. An overhead position, which could be either a handstand or with some sort of load overhead. We have pushing out, like a push-up or a bench. We have pushing down, like a dip. We have pulling in, which is some sort of row. We have a hang or a pull-up, like a pull-up. We have an upward pull, which is what we see in that second pull in a clean or in a snatch, or even putting something on your shoulder. We have trunk and hip flexion, and then we have trunk extension. So these different movements, you can have different combinations of these movements for one exercise. For example, if someone is rowing gives you the setup position, as you would if you were doing a deadlift, and it gives you that pull in. So you can see that exercise has 2 different movement patterns in there. So we can go through and we can assess each of these. Now, each of these different positions has a lot of really common faults that are going to indicate some sort of underlying imbalance. So you look at a squat, and there's a lot to a squat, but in the end, there's only a small number of things that we really commonly see people do incorrectly. And this is where our system comes in. So this is where I'm going to talk to you about what we do, and then we'll talk about the practicality of how that actually works. So when our clients come in, it's all one-on-one stuff here at Range of Motion. So everything's individualized. So when our clients come in, they grab one of these cards, and you can see that's a steel card, so printed on like steel sign, and they come in and they put their name on the top of their card there with the whiteboard markers, and then you can see each of these different columns here, A through to L, is one of those different positions that I just spoke about. So let's use that example of doing something like a rowing stroke, and we talked about that being a setup and a pull in. So we know that that person, if all they're doing is rowing, those are going to be the two columns that person is going to select. Okay, so we now know which movements we are going to look at to identify any faults that they may be manifesting and what underlying causes are, and then we can work out what to prescribe for those. So you can see, for example, here, let's look at column B here. All right, so this is the setup position. So this is where they're at the front of their catch in their rowing stroke. This could also be the setup position in a deadlift. And you'll see there are two common faults that we often see, and these aren't technique faults of rowing, these are musculoskeletal faults, or faults in the shape that someone's able to get into. So they can have a rounded lower back, so that lordosis of their lumbar spine, or they could have a rounded thoracic spine and a sort of internal rotation, lack of scapular stability through their shoulder blades. So really, in a setup position in a deadlift, those are the two main issues we see: a deadlift, a clean, the start of your row stroke. So what we would then do is identify whether that issue is being caused by a lack of stability or a lack of mobility. So let's say, for example, that someone is rowing and at the front of their stroke in their catch, they've got a really rounded lower back. Use the example of a deadlift. Someone is deadlifting and their lumbar spine is really rounded. That could be caused by one of two things. It could either be caused by the fact that their hamstrings are so tight that they're pulling the pelvis into that posterior tilt. So the hamstrings are pulling the pelvis into that posterior tilt, which is making it difficult to set that lumbar spine tightly, which of course would be corrected by doing like a rack pull or lifting off some plates, or shortening the row stroke. That could be the first issue. The second issue could be that there's a lack of stability, which could be a motor control issue. They don't know how to turn on the extensors of their lumbar spine, or the extensors of their lumbar spine are perhaps weak, or if the technique gets worse as they keep rowing, there's some sort of fatigue resistance issue that comes in. So you can see now we can say, well, all right, so here's our rowing, and you then do the same thing for the other column. We're going to triage this and say, front of the catch, as someone's rowing, either the lower back's rounding or the upper back's rounding, which is going to be the biggest problem. I'm going to say, because it's the example we've just used, that its lower back is rounded. And you can see here, we have options S and M. S for stability, M for mobility. So we're going to say that this issue in this client, this individual, is being caused by a lack of stability. So for that column, we've circled S for stability there. So we now know that this person is lacking some sort of activation or stability, which means that they are rounding their lumbar spine as they row. What we can then do is say, well, what exercises do we need to do to fix that? So let me talk you through again what we do here. So we've got the card, and we can see on the card that, where are we? Just there, column B, there is an issue with lower back rounding. There's a stability issue. So then what would happen is they come to this chart. Now, this all looks pretty advanced and complicated and complex, and there's a lot going on. This is something that we teach our clients. So when they've been with us for about a month, they know how these systems all work that allow us to run these movement assessments with them every session, add that extra value. So at the end of their session, we basically give them their card that we've used to assess their movements as we go. We give them that card. They can then bring it to here, and they know how this works. So this column here, column B, corresponds to the column that you guys just saw on the card. So here's your column B, which is your setup and the main faults. You can see here, lower back rounded. This fault would be upper back rounded or shoulders forward. So we know that for lower back rounded, there is release and stretch work. We use PNF as our stretch work. And then there's activate and stabilize stuff. So if we look at this activate and stabilize work here, sorry, dodgy camera work. So the activate and stabilize stuff that you can see there, those three movements, those 3 bullet points are what we would prescribe for someone. They would choose one of those. So we don't want to be giving them a million things to do every time. This is just about 10 minutes of extra work to do after. So one of those things there, for example, was a standing hand on knees, pelvic tilt, accumulating 20 reps. This is more of a motor control type movement, just to teach them what neutral pelvis actually feels like. And then we have on the chart here, pictures and descriptions of how all of this stuff is done. So if we look for standing, hands on knees, pelvic tilts, which is right down here. Okay, standing, hands on knees, pelvic tilts, just there. You can see there's a description of the start and end points of how to do the movement, a description of the movement itself, and the QR code here, basically our clients hold their phone up to that and it takes them to a video of how to do that. So you can basically see how our process works. We triage what the main issue is with someone, and then once we've worked out what the main issue is with their movement quality, this is happening when they row, this is happening when they squat, this is happening when they push up. We identify the main issue of each of those different shapes or positions, each of those different columns in this chart, in this card, in this chart over my shoulder. Then we identify, is it a stability issue or a mobility issue? They take it to the board, and then it tells them which exercises to do for each. So you can see every single time they come in, even though we may be coaching someone through a one-on-one session and we're wearing all those different hats, being the counter and the motivator and the technician and the counselor and all these other roles we play, we're also doing a movement assessment at the same time, where we will see them as they're squatting, their feet are turned out a lot. If their feet are turned out, that's indicative maybe there's some tightness through their Achilles, through their soleus. Therefore, this is what they need to do to fix that, which is what's addressed on the board. So that's basically how our process works. So what I think you guys need to be doing is implementing in some way, and it doesn't need to be crazy complex like that. That's what we do, and it's something that we've developed over sort of a decade and a half. What I think you guys need to be doing is first making sure that you can look at a movement and assess what the movement fault is. And it's really important here that we address things in order of priority. And what I mean by that is, if you see a movement issue, so let's say someone's knees are falling in as they're squatting, you don't initially want to say, that person needs to go and do some work to develop the glutes to be involved in that external lateral rotation of the hip to get their knees tracking out. I wouldn't jump straight to that. I would start by trying to coach it out of them. So the first thing to try and do is technique improvement or correction. You just providing good training and coaching to that client. The reason being is you may be able to fix the problem very simply just by saying, hey, screw your feet into the ground as you're squatting, and boom, the knees are now tracking as we want them to. The best way to improve squat technique is not by doing any fancy rehab exercises. The best way to improve squat technique is by practicing squatting with good technique. Yeah. The best way to improve someone's deadlift technique is to do good deadlifts. It's that real specificity. Now, of course, if there's some underlying issue, you can't just coach them out of a certain problem. So if the technique correction doesn't work, you then need to go on to motor control. Motor control is where you have someone who doesn't know how to set their lumbar spine. You guys have probably all seen this. Someone who's maybe never done a deadlift before. You actually have to teach them what neutral spine feels like. They're not used to activating those extensors of the lumbar spine. So that's a motor control thing. That's the brain telling the nerves, telling the muscles to switch on. So that would be my second port of call. Then and only then, if the technique correction and the motor control work doesn't work, then you can move down to the movement therapy. And that's where you would say, okay, is there some sort of issue through activation of the hip flexors? Is there some inhibition of hip flexors, glutes being caused by tightness through the hamstrings due to some PNF that's going to combine some of the mobility and stability work in there? Do they need to build up more strength and stamina and stability through those muscles involved in extension of the lumbar spine? So only after technique and motor control do you move down to movement therapy. Guys, let me simplify this for you in terms of what I think you can start doing as of now, as of your next PT client. As your client is going through their session, just make a note somewhere, a mental note on paper, phone, iPad, whatever. Just make a note of what you see as the major technique issue that may be caused by some sort of imbalance, strength, weakness, lack of stability, lack of flexibility. So someone's doing squats, and just to keep using this example, someone's doing squats and you notice that their knees are falling in. Then at the end, you give them an extra exercise to do after you've finished with them, or you can do this with them. There's some really good partner assisted PNF stuff that you can do as well. But at the end of their session, you say to them, okay, as you were training today, I noticed that your knees are falling in. And we worked on this. I helped you. We talked about screwing your feet into the ground to get the knees tracking out, but it was still happening. Your knees are falling in because, however you want to word it, the muscles involved in rotating your hip outwards are not turning on as much as they should. So therefore, to finish the session, we are going to do a single exercise that's going to help to get those muscles working. And if you can do that every single session you do, what is the biggest issue here? The rounding of the back in the deadlift, the lack of scapular, maybe elevation and protraction in a front rack position for a front squat or a jerk, feet turning out too much in a squat. All of these different issues that we can have. If you can find the most important issue every single time and give them an exercise to fix that, over the weeks, months, years that these people will be your clients, you have the opportunity to always work on the low-hanging fruit, to always work on that thing that is the greatest issue for this person. And over time, if you keep if you keep triaging the thing that is worst, that thing will start to improve. And then relatively speaking, something else will become the worst. And then you work on improving that. And if you're always working on that low-hanging fruit, you're going to improve their overall movement quality. Guys, I hope this is of use to you. I hope I didn't overwhelm you with the systems that we run. Obviously, this is something that we take a lot of time to train our staff and clients up with. But again, you can simplify this. 3 steps. Identify that there's a certain thing going on in their movement pattern. Assess what it is that's causing that, and then prescribe some stuff to do. If you can add this into every PT session you run, it just adds another string to your bow that you can really improve the experience that you're offering your clients. Guys, if you'd like to touch base on any of this, drop a comment below or hit me up via email, dan@rangeofmotion.net.au. And I will see you again soon.